Welcome to our webinar, Incoterms 2020. It's an interactive webinar and it's a Q&A session. So you guys can start submitting questions anytime throughout the webinar. You can start submitting them now if you want. There is a Q&A button. It's going to be on the top of your screen or bottom of your screen. Just hit that Q&A and you can submit your question there anonymously, or if you go ahead and submit it with your name, then if we don't get to your question, we can at least reply back to you outside of this webinar. So while you're submitting those questions, I'll talk about Scarborough for a minute. If you want to head over to the next slide, you can show some of our companies. So Scarborough Group of Companies is a full service international domestic transportation provider. We're known for our expertise and customized solutions. We're a US and Mexican customs broker, and we also offer warehousing and fulfillment services. We're headquartered in the heart of America, Kansas City, Missouri, with offices across the USA and close partners in every major port in the world. We also have locations at the border, on both sides of the border, between US and Mexico. My name is Kim Taylor. I am the marketing director for Scarborough, and we're lucky to have with us today Allison and Patrick. They both bring a wealth of knowledge and experience and years of experience in both import and export operations. They're both Incoterms experts. And if you guys need help with anything, feel free to reach out to any of us for Incoterms consultation, supply chain consultation, anything that you need. I also wanted to mention that if your company has a very complex supply chain and you need help training or directing your internal staff on Incoterms or which terms to use, then we are happy to come in and help with that. So contact me, Kim Taylor, if you want more details on an in-depth customized Incoterms training. We have a lot of questions already coming in. That's awesome. Yes, all of you guys will receive this presentation and the recording of this probably in the next week or so. So as long as you've registered for this, you will get a copy of that. And I think that's it. If you're just now joining us, make sure to submit your questions. And I think that's it. Allison, I will turn it over to you now.
Okay, fantastic. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Allison Schroer. I am the Corporate Compliance Manager here at Scarborough. I am a licensed customs broker and certified customs specialist, and I have been at Scarborough for just over 14 years.
All right. And my name is Pat Colligan. I've been with Scarborough as well for 14 years. Looks like we have a lot in common, Allison. I'm also the licensed customs broker and certified customs specialist. And I got my start in the industry about 24 years ago in the JFK area. And today, my goal is to really answer your questions as thoroughly and as clearly as possible, so you guys can really take something out of this. Thanks for joining us.
All right, we'll get started. So the first question we have here is, what is the ICC? The ICC is the International Chamber of Commerce. It's the largest business organization in the world created to promote global trade and investment. It's not owned by any one government. The ICC keeps the United Nations and the World Trade Organization in touch with views of international business. Really just kind of offers a good common language to be used all over the world for Incoterms. The first set of Incoterms was issued in 1936, and they're updated every 10 years. So, here we are today talking about Incoterms 2020. Just last year we were using 2010 and had been using it for the 10 previous years. So ICC rules today are used for the use of domestic and international trade terms.
Yeah, so as Allison mentioned, I think the greatest thing it does for us here, it really lets us speak a common language. Obviously we're doing business with people where English is not their first language. So, these Incoterms, allow us to get on the same page pretty quickly with our, international suppliers and buyers.
So what are Incoterms? Incoterms are a set of 11 trade terms used in contracts for sale and purchase of goods. Definitely a thing that needs to be remembered is Incoterms are not law. It's strictly guidance. It's really transfer of risk is what you need to be thinking of when you think of Incoterms. It describes obligations and costs, who's paying for each, leg of the journey and getting your freight in and out of the country. Rules of thumb, the party responsible for transportation arrangement and payment of transportation charges is in control of the cargo. And the more responsibility the party has, the more control they have. So they also, unfortunately, bear more risk. So you're looking at things like customs, exams, licensing, you name it.
Yeah. And I'll probably just point out one thing. I might have some questions on this later, so I might answer one of them right now. But as far as the licensing goes on exports from the United States, at the end of the day, really, it is still up to the exporter, even if you're selling on an ex works term, that you need to really determine licensability of your product. While you can assign that to your buyer, it's got to be a very specific, document that you guys agree on. I definitely, recommend you put it in writing. And at the end of the day, I probably wouldn't even recommend you do so, just because you know your product better than anybody. So let's just keep that in mind as far as licensing goes, for exports from the States.
Okay, Incoterms do not automatically apply. Definitely something to keep in mind when you're buying and selling. You must discuss your Incoterms. There is no, that's what I'm looking for.
There's no set standard. There's no standard for it.
Yep. So they do not determine ownership. It's a common misconception, but they do not determine ownership, and they do not address transfer of title.
Which is, I think, is the biggest myth that we see is title and ownership of the merchandise, and they don't just don't cover it. That's within your contract between the buyer and seller, and you can dictate that in that contract wherever you'd like to, whether it's 10% of payment, 50%, 100%, you name it. That's negotiable between you and your supplier or buyer.
They do not determine payment terms. They do not act as a substitute for a contract, define contractual rights, except for delivery, or breach of contract remedies. They do not protect parties from their own risk or loss, or cover the goods before or after delivery. I think that's something people forget about.
Yeah, insurance in general, I think, really needs to be addressed almost separately, even though the Incoterm would dictate this, the seller would need the insurance. I would verify that they're getting it, just get on the same page with that, because under a lot of these terms, they're really under no obligation to purchase insurance.
And last but not least, they do not specify details of the transfer, transport, or delivery of the goods. For example, container loading is not considered packaging, and definitely would need to be addressed in your contract. And then the only Incoterm that specifies unloading is our new Incoterm this year, DPU.
Okay, so I'm just going to reiterate this. I know that you mentioned this really quick, but somebody already has asked about it, so let's just touch on it again. I understand that Incoterms do not dictate the point where title to goods transfer or revenue recognition. Is this correct?
Yes, that is spot on. These matters should be specified within the provisions of your contract with your customer or vendor.
Great, thank you.
All right. Okay, so we'll get right into Incoterms 2020. Things to remember: there is always a named point associated with every Incoterm. You can't just say it's FOB. You have to, if you look down at the bottom here in this box, we've got examples. You're going to ship FOB Houston, Texas. The name point identifies where the goods are delivered, where risk transfers from the seller to buyer, with exception of C terms, which maybe we can get into that a little more. And who is responsible for insurance, packaging, loading, transport arrangements, costs, origin, and destination customs responsibilities. So right under here, we've got kind of the best practice here for how to list your Incoterm. Start with your Incoterm, your named point, and then end with Incoterms 2020.
Yeah, it's like when we see commercial invoices day in and day out, and I'd probably say 15% to 20% really had the full name, listing the actual Incoterm, what year they're working off and so on and so forth. And, to go back up to the exception of the C term, if you are typically when you're buying on a C term, you're buying, if it's an import into the United States, CFR New York. Okay. But your risk obligation actually starts once that container crosses the rail on the ship and is loaded on the ship in, say, Southampton, UK. So if that falls off the boat on the way to New York, in between, you're still on the hook. You are the one at risk at that point, which is different when you're, say, buying on a D term, DAP, that would be delivered to your, place of business, and the shipper is on at risk the whole way.
All right. Okay, so the major Incoterms 2020 changes. There's not, I mean, there are definite changes. They're kind of, in my opinion, a little underwhelming, but
Yeah.
we do have a couple of changes to go over. So cost items are now spelled out under the seller and buyer, making it easier to understand where the cost was borne. If you look at the Incoterms 2020 book, it's really laid out nicely in there to make it much easier to understand. The new Incoterms points out risks exist when a buyer or seller becomes the importer or exporter of record in a foreign country. So that's a good addition. The security requirements in relation to transportation related issues are covered in the new Incoterms 2020. They are now written to include arrangement of freight by non-carriers. Oh, here's, the Incoterms 2020 design is more user-friendly than 2010. So looking back at that, your Incoterms book, it's a lot easier to navigate.
They're definitely spelling things out a little more thoroughly, which is always good.
Good old DAT, delivered at terminal, was omitted. I really don't know that I actually saw too many people use those the last,
you and me both.
last 10 years.
Maybe on some truck shipments here and there, but not a whole lot of international.
So we said goodbye to DAT and we said hello to DPU, delivered to door and unloaded. And last but not least, the CIP default insurance coverage has been changed from free of particular average to all risk.
Well, if you're buying on the CIP term, that's good news for you because all risk coverage is a much broader coverage than free of particular average. FPA covers transportation perils, sinking, being stranded, fire, and things like that. But it won't include such things as war risk or a strike or a riot unless you actually specify that. So if you're buying on that CIF term, if you want those things covered, you'd have to specify with your supplier.
So since you guys just went through several of the major Incoterms that were changed in the past decade, we do have a question. What's your opinion of the most significant, what are like 2 or 3 of the most significant changes that you see?
I'd say that's, well, significant. They've added one and they've deleted one. That's pretty significant. And I think the most significant thing is they've detailed out a little more of what costs are borne by whom. So they're spelling that out a little more, which I think is a great thing. I wish they would have added origin export clearance. They really haven't put that on a separate line item, which what I'd like to see. But I think they are, starting to incorporate more specifics in which particular costs. As you know, if you're buying freight, your invoice typically doesn't come in a one-line item. You're going to get your charge quite a bit, terminal handling, unloading, loading, especially if you're moving LCL. So I think they're getting closer to getting most of the costs covered.
And then just to answer another question that was asked, DPU right there stands for delivered to door and unloaded.
Yes.
We've got another question here. If contracts or negotiations already exist with Incoterms 2010, do you recommend keeping them the same or renegotiating to Incoterms 2020?
That's a good question, but I would say I definitely recommend that you do put Incoterms 2020 and renegotiate that. It's good to be working off the most updated Incoterms within your contracts. Again, there hasn't been a ton of change. However, it would be wise to review the specific term you're using to verify.
Now, if you are writing out in contracts or POs, which Incoterm you're using, is it a good practice to indicate Incoterms 2020 on the documentation, or is it just known and defaulted to Incoterms 2020?
No, it's not known because I sometimes see stuff going back even further than 2010, to be honest with you. You know, there's some, it's amazing. But so yeah, I definitely updated to show 2020. You're right, then you're on the same page and you're working off the latest and greatest.
Thank you for that.
Okay. So here is a Incoterms 2020 chart of responsibility. We'll just kind of walk through some of the layout on here. It's very nicely put together. Look at the top, you can see which Incoterms apply to each mode of transport. X Works and the F terms up to, well, FCA are any transport mode. And then you walk over to the right and you'll see your sea and inland waterway transport. And that takes you all the way over to CIF. And then we're back into any transport mode again with CPT on. Down the left-hand column, down the side, you'll see all of the, basically the points along the way.
Yep.
The transfer of risk, the commercial invoice, the packaging, you know, loading, every step of the way. And this just walks you through who is responsible for each portion. I really do like the transfer of risk across the top here as well. It really kind of lays it out and makes it pretty simple. Things to remember: your commercial invoice, your packaging, quality control, and markings are all on the seller's side. They must take care of all of those.
One thing I see there, you know, the export duty and taxes. I don't know if you see a whole lot of that out there. You know, if you're selling something, typically the country that you're residing isn't going to kind of tax you. But I mean, there's maybe a handful of countries that do that, but it's not a whole lot.
And then you can go ahead. You're fine. Go ahead.
We just had somebody come in here and ask, although there's not like a hard or fast rule to really answer this question, but which Incoterms do you think are the best Incoterms to use? How would you answer that with this chart that we're looking at?
Well, yeah, it's definitely going to come down to your business decision and, you know, how much risk you want and how much control you want. We recommend you use an FCA or an F term because, you know, think about it this way. I mean, freight's not a tangible product, obviously, but if you're paying for it at the end of the day, you know, if you're buying widgets at $1 a widget, but you're buying it delivered to your door, within that dollar is the cost of the freight, somewhere in there. They're not doing it for free, and they probably might have some margin in the freight themselves, right? So if you're buying something, I mean, if I'm going to buy a car, I want to choose the color, I want to choose my accessories, you know, I want the sunroof, I want that type of thing. And you don't get that if you buy on a term other than an F or an E. So with the F term, you know, you're choosing your transiton, you're choosing your carrier, your forwarder, you're choosing, okay, I want to be notified on this milestone or that milestone. So that's why we recommend that. You get that control. Yeah, you bear some more risk, but you get the control out of it. And then you also get to control your costs. And I think also it gives you, a huge advantage in just supply chain visibility.
So would you agree that it'd be best practice to buy on F terms and sell on C terms?
I would, correct. And then also if you're selling on a C term, you're showing the buyer that, hey, look, I got things in place. I have, all these processes I can do. I got all these agreements with my carriers, and it might just make your product a little bit easier to sell. It's if you make it easier for them. I mean, that's our job here for our customers at Scarborough is to make their jobs easier. So it just might show them that you can do that, and then additionally, you could put some margin in there yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So I got another question that popped up. We've got somebody on here asking, where can we get a copy of this book, meaning the Incoterms actual published book published by the ICC? And you can actually purchase that. I saw that they are selling, maybe some third-party sellers are selling them on Amazon, but you can also purchase it direct from their website. I will send out a link when I send out the recording and the presentation for this. I'll send out a link so you can go out and purchase that book. We do recommend that you do purchase that. It goes very much more in depth on each of the Incoterms. Also, I wanted to point out that this actual chart, the chart of responsibility, what we call the chart of responsibility, you guys can download this online through our website. I'll send a downloadable PDF to you. But also, if you want to purchase some cardstock copies, we can sell those in bundles. So again, just contact me, Kim Taylor, and I can get you set up with shipping off several of these cardstock. They're very nice, durable Incoterms charts. And on the back of them, we also have a ocean, container, dimension, cheat sheet sort of thing. So let me know if you're interested in that. I think that's it for questions right now.
All right. So now we're just going to kind of go through and take a little bit closer look at each of the terms here. So we're going to start with Xworks, or the, I guess, X terms. Always insert your named place of delivery. So this is going to be where you have the most control. You have all the control, basically. The seller's obligations are really just to complete the goods as promised, package the goods, create the commercial invoice, do their quality control checks, make sure all your country of origin markings are on your goods, and then make them available at the named place. And then loading is not required by the seller, but it can be specified. And then, you know, once again, you really have all of the control. All the risk is on you. And this is one that if you really want to have all the control, you can, but there's things to keep in mind with Xworks.
Most definitely. And, you know, one thing with the loading, you know, at the end of the day, I think a lot of time if you show up with a truck, your seller's going to get it loaded. I haven't seen too many issues where we've shown up with a truck on an Xworks term where the guy says, well, you got to hire some forklift driver to come here in my premises, but hey, make it specific like we mentioned. The one areas where we probably not recommend Xworks is where you have some countries where there's a little instability, any political turmoil. I would recommend you stay away from doing Xworks in those areas. And I'd also recommend you stay away from doing Xworks in countries where the export clearance process it's not clear, or I would say it's not easy. If it takes several days and it's a real paper-driven process, I'd stay away from it. There might be some things in there you don't want to find out about. Countries such as Brazil and Russia, those are areas I probably recommend you'd stay away from the Xworks term, because at the end of the day, you're going to be responsible to get the cargo cleared for exportation.
So when would you recommend using Xworks for a shipment? Are there specific regions, or when you say that there's risk involved, what are those risks?
Well, the risks are if something goes wrong, it's down to you to fix it. If there's damage, if there's something falls off a ship or something like that, you're on the hook for the risk.
And risks of navigating a foreign country's clearance requirements.
Yeah, so if there's a delay in export clearance and now you're sitting at an airport somewhere, or a warehouse near the airport, and for some reason there's some issues going on there's a strike over there, and now it's sitting at 2 weeks, 3 weeks at an airport warehouse for clearance, guess who's paying the cost for those storage charges, which probably aren't cheap? It's you as the buyer, on an Xworks term.
Are there certain regions that you would suggest Xworks, or that maybe use Xworks a little bit more than others?
Yeah, we see Xworks more out of European countries. China's more of an F term market, but we definitely see more and more Xworks too out of there. Such volume coming out of there that's it's not a big risk, I would say. But those are the two main areas or regions that we see Xworks terms. I mean, even out of India, I see it pretty commonly.
On an Xworks shipment, who's responsible to provide the SLI or file the AES?
Okay, so now we're talking exports from the States. At the end of the day, on an Xworks term coming out of the United States, the buyer, which is a routed export transaction, the buyer on a routed export transaction is responsible to authorize their chosen forwarder to file the AES. However, the shipper is still responsible to provide the buyer's forwarder with many data elements listed on the SLI. But technically, the seller is not required to provide an SLI to the forwarder that their buyer has chosen. At the end of the day, the forwarder needs the shipper's or buyer's authorization to file the AES. The forwarder needs it from somebody. The issue that we run into as forwarders is that the buyers overseas don't know that. So they're buying it on and you're selling on ex-works term, but they don't know that they have to give a power of attorney or a shipper's letter of instruction to somebody in the States. It's just they're not informed of that. So at the end of the day, what winds up happening in a lot of cases is the forwarders are sending the SLI to the shippers, to expedite the shipment and just get things moving.
As the seller, is there a downside to ex-works?
Yes, there is, I'd say. Number one, you might be dealing with a different forwarder every week because your customer's going with the cheap and cheerful one for the week. And then plus, if you are then filling out an SLI and you're not controlling the export information that you're sending to customs yourself, it doesn't matter which forwarder is filing for you. If they do it wrong, it's your problem. You are the USPPI. So we recommend that if you're using an ex-work term, okay, and you're going to have all these other forwarders that might be doing it, or maybe it's just one forwarder, but get the export data, have them send what they've transmitted, to customs to you so you can verify it's accurate. That's the best practice. And, if you're doing that and your license determination information is sound, that's a good practice to abide by.
I've got one more question here, and it kind of pertains to all of the new groups. If we are buying under ex-works named port today, Incoterms 2010, what is the difference with the change to Incoterms 2020? And that same question is posed with FOB as well. So if we are buying under ex-works or FOB named port today, 2010, what is the difference with the changes between the two?
I don't think there is any. And with ex-works, we really don't see ex-works named port typically. If you're buying ex-works, you're picking it up from your shipper's factory in most cases. And with the F terms, there hasn't been a ton of change in between those from 2010 to 2020 either. If it's FOB, Felixstowe, that there's no difference from the 2010 to the 2020.
Great. I think we can move on to F terms.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, the F terms. As Pat mentioned earlier, this is kind of where we recommend you sit if you're importing. Starting with FCA, it's any transport mode. So this is going to be just an easy one to go with. Moving into FAS and FOB, these are only ocean. So things to remember, you can't use FOB, let's say Kansas City,
Right.
or, an airport. You need to make sure you're using FOB and FAS for ocean cargo and then, inland waterway. So your seller's obligations in the F terms are just to make the goods available at the named port of the buyer's choice and the export customs formalities.
And I think that's the biggest one. So if you're buying on FCA, with the big difference here really, because most FCA term that we see is still FCA shipper's premises. But in FCA, opposed to ex-works, they're taking care of the export customs formalities, which is great. Let them, they're in that country. They know their regulations. You probably don't, may not want to. So let them take care of that. But the one thing I would make a note of is we have a lot of FCA customers, but we see a lot of the cost for the clearance still trying to come collect. So you'll see on the invoice, customs clearance, origin export clearance, $50, something out of China is about that. Brazil, probably a lot more. And, in those, if you see that, you should push back against your seller and say, look, I'm buying FCA, your warehouse, you need to pay that charge.
Okay, what's the main difference between FCA and FOB?
Really, FOB is used at the port. So it's FOB New Delhi, FOB Mumbai. And then additionally, on FOB, the origin terminal handling is now payable by the shipper instead of you paying it on the other two F terms.
FOB is water only, and FCA is also, it's all modes as well, is
Right.
another difference.
Yes.
Got another question here. Let's see. If our company is responsible, I don't know if there's enough detail on this question or not. If our company is responsible for inland freight to Miami port, what would be the best terms to use, FCA or DAP?
Well, you wouldn't be using a DAP term in that scenario, really. I would call that, you can use FCA or FOB. You just need to specify the name spot. So if you want to do FOB Miami, then you need to get it down to the Miami port, and then you're responsible for all those charges to do so. And then on the FCA part of it, it's the same really, but you're also responsible for the export clearance.
Is it a true statement that Incoterms that are used for Dominican Republic may not work for Jamaica?
I don't think so. No, I think terms are pretty universal. I haven't seen ever got involved in an area where one country has not adopted the Incoterm.
Yeah, I would agree with that statement. Can you explain the difference between FAS and FOB?
We're back into the difference here between origin terminal handling. FAS is the buyer's responsible for the origin terminal handling, and the buyer just has to get the goods alongside the vessel. And then free on board, you're getting the goods on board the vessel.
Yeah, it's really just crossing those rails is the only difference. You get it on FAS, you're just getting it to the terminal. And an FOB, you're pretty much getting it on board.
Thank you. If we're buying goods to ship to Long Beach, then rail to Dallas, can we still use FOB? So this looks like an import to me. If we are buying goods to ship to Long Beach, then rail to Dallas, can we still use FOB?
Most definitely. Yep. You can, it would be, usually again, FOB, you're going to see the origin port name. You got to follow that. Just again, FOB by itself means nothing. So, if you're to say that's coming out of Asia, going via Long Beach, it would be FOB Shanghai. And then you specify to your customer, well, you specify to your forwarder, in that case, that you want it to Dallas ramp.
And though it says FOB is ocean only, the FOB ocean is the portion we're looking at is the main carriage,
Correct.
Which is going to be the ocean freight, not the rail inland.
And also you can't use FOB country name. It has to be the city, the port.
Yes, you want to be specific here. Definitely. Be specific.
All right, let's keep moving forward. I don't see any more F group questions at the moment.
Okay, C terms. So the C terms, we're just looking at, CFR and CIF. Your sea and inland waterway only. Once again, make sure to insert your named port of destination for CFR and CIF. And for CIF, insurance is covered by the seller. So the C terms are the only places here that we see insurance is specifically called out on responsibility. So when we move down to CPT and CIP, all modes of transport, you also remember to insert your named place of destination, and for CIP, insurance is covered by the seller as well. So your seller's obligations here are transport arrangements, the charges associated with transport, and most of the cost to the named place.
Yeah, and the reason why we say we don't recommend a C term, say on an importation, is I'll give you an example. You have a container coming in and something's happened. You got a line down situation now. Who do you contact? You may not even know. You contact your shipper. They tell you to call Joe Blow in Miami. You try to get a hold of him. You don't know. He doesn't know you from Adam. I mean, that's a difficult situation when you got 100 people breathing down your neck for that cargo. So just bear that in mind, and also bear in mind, like we see in a lot of cases, especially if you're buying LCL, say to Chicago. So C and F Chicago on an LCL shipment. you're happy, the shipper's taking care of it all the way, it's pretty much close to your door. But then what you don't realize is that when it gets here, all the destination costs are collect. And you haven't negotiated any charges with anybody, and boom, you bring it in, a cubic meters worth of cargo, and you got $450 to pay just to get it in and out of container and onto your truck. So there's some pitfalls with that, which you should just be mindful of.
Yeah, we've had instances where clients have had full containers shipped to, we'll say CPT, LA, and then you have to unload the container and truck that all the way inland. And sometimes that costs more than just booking it all the way in, inland on the rail.
Well, it's certainly more than the ocean freight these
Exactly,
days.
exactly.
So can I use CIP or CPT Incoterms for ocean freight?
Yes, you can. All modes.
Terrific.
All right.
Yeah, we don't have a whole lot of C group questions, but now that we're on D terms, we've got a lot coming in, so get ready.
So your D terms, these are all any mode of transport, and the seller is responsible for the transport arrangements and their related charges to the end destination. So just the the differences between them, they're very few. DAP is delivered to door only. DPU is delivered to door and unloaded, and DDP is delivered to door unloaded, and duties and taxes are paid for by your seller. And this is where the DAT term was removed here on this version.
Yeah, they removed the DAT and they put in the DPU. And if I'm a seller and or even I'm a buyer, the unloading a destination, being responsible for that, it sounds a little tricky to me. Unless there's specifics. I mean, I see this maybe happening in more overdimensional cargo when you need a crane or something like that, where the buyer doesn't want to have to arrange for that, but that puts the onus on your shipper to really know the layout of your facility and such too. Can you bring in the necessary crane into your facility with different height requirements and specifications and weight specifications. So I'd be a little concerned about using that DPU and expecting your seller to figure out the unloading. I mean, you talk about it and work it out. It can happen, but I'd just be a little bit concerned about it.
And then on the other end of things too, as a seller, I would not sell on DDP terms because once again, dealing with that foreign country's customs clearance process, could get sticky.
Okay, so let's talk about that DPU versus DAP real quick. I've got a question here, and it says that we shipped to South Korea using DAP Incoterms, and we recently came across a problem where warehouse charges came into the question. Would DPU be a better option to solve us of any warehouse changes that might incur and pass that on to my buyer?
I'd like to know which warehouse we're talking here. Is it your actual, I guess it's the actual buyer's warehouse? And
that's what it would appear to.
Okay. Well, if you're selling on a DAP term, then any charges at the warehouse, really, you're responsible to just get it there. They're responsible to get it unloaded. Actually, it says right there, it's negotiable. So it's between the buyer or the seller, opposed to DPU, where it's up to the seller to get it unloaded. So if you have some costs for warehousing, on a DAP term, that's just something you want to address and see if you can figure out, who's got to pay for it. I would not want to pay for somebody else's warehouseman. I don't know the going rate over there, and I wouldn't want to be involved in it at the end of the day. But that's obviously my opinion.
So let's talk about the risk with DDP. We've got several questions that came in, so I'm going to list them all out and then we can talk about them. Under DDP, who is the importer of record? If the seller uses the wrong HGS code, who is liable? Who is responsible for import clearance charges with D terms? And do DDP terms include current tariffs? So this is several different people's questions, so I think you guys can answer this.
Yeah, why don't you start from the top again, and we'll answer them one by one.
Okay, under DDP, who is the importer of record? And if the seller uses the wrong HTS code, who's liable?
Seller and the seller. On a DDP term, if it's an import into the States, your seller is the importer of record. They should have filled out a power of attorney to the customs broker here in the States. and they are responsible to pay the duty and be the importer of record, duties and tax. So if they mess up the tariff, it's up to them. That they have to pay the duty that they've chosen based on that HTS. So there's a risk right there. Now if they've chosen the wrong tariff, and it's now inevitably, if you're buying from them, the duty is incorporated in the cost of the product as well. So if they messed the tariff classification up and it should have been a 2% duty rate, but they think it's a 5%, so you're actually paying an extra 3% in there.
And would that be the same on an export out of the United States with DDP terms as well?
For the most part,
Yeah.
there are some countries that don't allow for DDP.
Mm-hmm. Mexico being one, Brazil being another, I believe. Yeah.
But yes, you as the seller would still be responsible for being the importer of record and paying your duties and taxes. And that's on the selling side, like Patrick just said, you need to make sure you're covering your cost. And if you assumed that it was a 3% and you get it delivered and cleared through customs and come back and find your duty rate was 12%, well, you're out.
Does DDP terms, do they include current tariffs? I think what that's meaning, say like the additional tariffs, maybe the section 301 or 232.
Well, yeah, it is what it is. The product isn't, no matter who the importer of record is, the product should be classified properly, which is the most important thing as an importer to get right, to be honest. So yes, if it's eligible for Section 301 or a Section 232 tariff, in addition to the standard HTS, tariff within chapters 1 and 97, then yeah, it's definitely still applicable.
Can you guys maybe touch on some of the risk involved with DDP, much like the Ex-Works sort of risk involved?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we see a lot is this. They bought a DDP. It gets to say O'Hare Airport, and you call up the forwarder who your shipper told you to contact, and it says, "Well, we didn't get the power of attorney from them. You mind signing for us here?" Because it's again, a lot of the sellers won't know, okay, I need to get a power of attorney for it to be cleared. You don't need that in a lot of other countries. So they could be selling to, another country such as India, where on a DDP term, and they never had to fill out any power of attorney form. It's kind of unique for the States, I believe, in some aspect. But so that's a big thing we see with DDP, where now it's here, it's 2,000 kilos. Nobody's got the authorization to file the customs clearance. And guess what? The airlines give us 24 hours free. So we got some issues. Obviously, on a DDP term, all that should go back to the seller, but you want the product, don't you? So that's one area where we want our buyers to avoid DDP, because the sellers just don't know the rules and regulations here, as you do as an importer, or you would if you reached out to a broker to get that information.
And as a seller, why should I avoid DDP?
Well, I think, again, just the same reasons why, with the tariff situation and the clearance situation, if you're confident with your forwarder and their agent abroad that they have, everything buttoned down and everything, the process is mapped out, then okay, it's definitely possible. There's not, I won't say DDP can't be used, but there's just a lot more risk. You are on the hook to get all the way to the door. So again, if there's something going wrong in that destination country, there's a riot, there's a strike, there's something that pops up, again, you're on the hook. And then additionally, if you get into places such as Europe, there's a GST involved and a VAT involved, and that should be specified, initially within the contract, who's paying that. And I've seen it both ways, where the importer, who's in the United States, gets registered over there and is able to claim back the VAT. I think that's a pretty laborious challenge and process, but it can be done. I have some clients that do it. But it's a lot easier for the company in the destination country to claim that VAT back. And at the end of the day, there's no way you can kind of incorporate that into your product and it'll be a viable product to be sold at the destination country, because the VAT and the GST can be up to 20% in some cases.
So we actually have several questions about the GST and VAT, since there's no actual Incoterm that specifies that. How do you suggest we go about maybe excluding VAT on an Incoterm? For example, I have a question here that says, can you have DDP excluding VAT?
Most definitely. And that's just something you want to specify in your contract and your PO, put in there, DDP, Incoterms 2020, and I'd write down the delivery address or the city name it's going to, excluding any duty or any GST or VAT. Make that specific.
So you want to be as specific as possible and not just assume that VAT or GST is incorporated with those DDP terms.
Most definitely, and a lot of companies over there that are familiar with the the GST and VAT have an account on file with the local government. They claim back that VAT and GST once they sell the product on. They set it up in a couple of different ways. It's quarterly, it's yearly. It's up to their discretion on how many times they want to claim it back.
Okay, with the term DAP, delivering to a foreign consignee, is it necessary to provide company name, city, and country, or is city, country sufficient?
I think city and country is sufficient. I don't know that you need to have the name of the company. That's not how the Incoterms are laid out.
Yeah, I just put the DAP and the city name is pretty specific where it's going to. Maybe read that one more time, Kim.
With the term DAP, delivering to a foreign consignee, is it necessary to provide the company name along with the city and country, or just the city and country is sufficient? And I think we probably need to add the address and zip code or postal code in there too.
Wouldn't hurt, but typically we see on a commercial invoice, DOP, Kansas City, Missouri door. At the end of the day, the company name is already on the commercial invoice, or it should be, because you're billing for the product. I don't think it would hurt, but it's just not something typically we see.
This goes back to the VAT again. If we ship from Asia to Italy using our customer's forwarder, can we use DAP terms and still be considered the importer of record, so we will be responsible for the VAT?
And not on a DAP term, really it's the responsibility of the Italian company to be the importer and pay the duties and the VAT on a DAP term.
Thank you. We have several more questions, so let's get through these. If I sell DDP and I request the support from the consignee for customs clearance, in the case that the country does not allow me to be a foreign importer of record to clear it, should I change Incoterms on negotiation and documentation?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
If they're going to be the importer, but you're still paying the duty, it's still DDP at the end of the day. If you have that agreement where they're the importer, that's great. Let them take care of that. I would, obviously work closely with them to make sure that product's classified properly. What that percentage is going to be. And I would say get familiar also with, their broker that they're using at the destination country. Have some kind of dialogue with them just to make sure that you're all on the same page.
Okay. Under the terms DAP, can we use DAP US or Canadian port of entry?
No, I wouldn't recommend that, because it's a delivered term. So it should show a door.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the question wasn't asked with much detail, but we do actually see DAP terms on a lot of domestic type moves, or in that case, North American type moves. But yeah, you would have to use the door address with that. Can you clarify who's responsible for demurrage and detention under DAP?
That's a tough one, I think. It's
a tough one.
Yeah, I think it's up to, it's going to depend on the circumstance, I think. Is it not being delivered because the forwarder you hired to get it delivered was inept or unable to do so? Or is it going into storage and demurrage because the customs broker has not done their job properly? Or there's there's another reason outside of that, so it's going to have to come down to the specific reason, I'd say, the specific situation. But I would say this, that if you're buying a DAP term, if there's costs such as detention and demurrage that aren't really listed on here. And it's going to be a little bit of a tough fight. I mean, you're going to want your cargo. So if it's now cleared and the storage is X, and you have to start fighting with your supplier about it, the clock's still ticking. So, I would say if there's a term like that where there's not the specific cost that's involved is not listed out there, it's going to be borne by the buyer. Such as say a customs exam, who's going to pay in that situation? That's a charge that your shipper has not foreseen. So that's going to be for the account of the consignee.
Okay, I've got one more D term question. This one just makes me laugh, so I'm going to go ahead and ask it. Where is the DDU?
Oh, we missed DDU.
Oh, we lost them in 2010.
Yeah. That was replaced by DAP.
10 years ago. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to our next slide, and then we'll jump back into more questions if we've got time.
Okay. All right. Just we've addressed a few of these throughout the course, of this webinar, but just kind of circling back around on things to watch out for. Trading houses, making sure you're specific with the named place of destination. Your shipping costs built into the price per unit. And this is really important to think about. If your supplier is selling you your widget for $1 a piece and 20 cents of that is freight, and that's not broken out on your invoice, you're going to be paying duties and taxes on your freight as well. So that's something to keep in mind. Plus, they mark it up.
And I would also add that if you say you're buying that widget at $1, how long is that the value good? 6 months, whatever you negotiated. If you're buying out of, say, China, guess what? Right after the Chinese New Year, the freight rates are going to drop through the floor. Is your price for the widget going to go down? I don't think so.
Probably not.
So, there's in markets with high volatility, bear that in mind.
Definitely do your homework. We really suggest that you be the one to suggest the Incoterm. Make a push for whatever makes sense, the most sense for you and your business. Insurance, as we mentioned before, there's just a couple of C terms that specify who's responsible for insurance. So make sure this is discussed up front and put it in your contract, get it in writing, make sure it's determined who's covering the insurance.
Yeah, because you would assume on a D term that your shipper is going to do it, but again, they really don't have an obligation to do so. I mean, if they're smart, they've got it and they've done it, but talk about it for sure.
Just the buyer's liability when buying on Ex Works. We talked a lot about that just because you're liable for everything. And then shippers building in margin if sold on a D or C term. So
yeah, we just talked about
that. We just hit that.
Okay, so you want to move on to Q&A?
Yeah.
Okay, so we only have a couple minutes left for Q&A. If you guys want to go ahead and keep sending them in, we will reach back out to you afterwards and answer your questions just in case we don't get to them. There's several we probably will not get to. But there's a lot of things that we probably could reiterate that are some questions that are coming through. So the first one I'm going to ask is, if you have not defined risk of loss or title transfer point in the contract, how do the Incoterms act as the default for guidance? What about title transfer? Do the Incoterms show that?
No, not at all. That's the biggest myth out there. That is going to be, the title is going to be between you and the seller or the buyer, whatever whichever way you're moving. That's got to be agreed outside of the Incoterm, period.
Okay, here's another one along the lines of that. If your PO is your contract with the vendor, then do the Incoterms have any legal influence on the transaction?
No. That's something also to address, get specifics, if there's any type of, grievance with the contract, there's something goes wrong, that has to be specified within the contract. The Incoterms not going to dictate that. As far as, if there's a, going to be a lawsuit or something, what countries regulations are going to be imposed, that's something you want to talk to your seller about and specifying the contract.
Okay. Again, this is another one you guys just hit on, but maybe reiterate it. Which side decides which term is going to be used, the buyer or the seller?
You agree, you have to come to an agreement together.
It's mutual.
Yep.
And what's the best way to determine the importer of record for each Incoterm?
The import of record is the United States party on importation on every term outside of DDP. And on exports out of the United States, the importer of record is the company receiving the merchandise, except DDP as well. And there is some room for negotiation within there when you're selling on a DDP, where you might possibly not be allowed to be a non-resident importer, where your customer is the importer, but you're going to pay the duty. But here in the States, technically, whoever's the importer of record is paying the duty. So if I have a power of attorney from ABC company, I'm billing ABC company, and they're the importer, I'm billing that company for the duty and tax.
Okay. Does VGM come into play in any Incoterm, or is this negotiable? Our freight forwarder completes this on our behalf as we do not have the ability. This can be an issue for the seller under X-Works.
Yeah, if it's an X-Works term, that's the VGM fees come and collect. So, VGM is an origin cost. So if, again, you're buying on an FOB term, FOB Shanghai, then the VGM cost really, I would say, would be borne by the shipper.
Okay, I've got a couple other questions in here that I might answer. If we have additional questions, who can we use as a resource, and will we receive a copy of this presentation? Well, you're welcome to use us as a resource if you have any other questions. Allison and Patrick are both Incoterms experts. If you have a very complex supply chain in your organization, you can contact me, Kim Taylor, for some in-depth customized training to kind of help direct your people on which Incoterms you want them to use. You can email that consulting@Scarborough email right there on the screen. I will be sending out an email with the recording along with the presentation, the ICC Incoterms book link to buy that direct from ICC, along with some other information. So hopefully that answers that. For all of you that have sent in questions that we did not get to today, we will go ahead and reach out to you and have those questions answered to you directly. So I've got a couple other questions that I can hit on since we've got about 2 more minutes, unless you two want to chime in and say anything.
No, bring them on.
Okay. As the seller, not the buyer, if my export shipment is under an LC for payment, letter of credit for payment, which term would be best for me to try and get the buyer to accept?
I would
So
still,
as a seller from the United States and my export shipments under a letter of credit for payment, what term would be the best to try to get the buyer to accept that?
I'd go into the C term as an exportation because, with the LC, obviously the documentation is critical. So you're now choosing the forwarder you're confident in, and there's amendments to do. You have a contact, who to go to get it done. So I would highly recommend with an LC that you're looking at that C term, because again, you're driving and you got the people here that can help you that you know.
What's the difference between a routed transaction and a related transaction?
I think the difference is the related transaction is between two companies that are the same, probably the same ownership structure and such. So ABC Company USA to ABC Company UK, that would be a related party transaction. And a routed export transaction is when you're as a seller from the United States, you're selling on an X-Works term, and your shipper is coordinating everything from your door to theirs.
Is it recommended that we have our Incoterm on invoices and other shipping documents, or only on the contract is enough?
I definitely put it on the invoice. very important to be on the commercial invoice, in addition to the PO, for sure. I'd chuck it on the packing list too if I could. Those are the two areas, commercial invoice and packing list. They really must be on if you want to make sure you're not going to get extra charges or you want to do your customs entry properly.
Mhm.
Okay, last question, and then we'll let you guys off of the call. If your seller was shipping product into your FTZ for further processing, what Incoterm would be best?
Yeah, again, it's if the seller's sending it to you to the FTZ, I would buy that on an F term again, so that I'm controlling it. Especially I have the people here that can file the 214 for me to get into the zone properly. I would not rely on a shipper to get a broker to handle that, especially with going into an FTZ. I'd shy away from that right away because there's a lot of brokers out there that don't really do FTZ work. It's very highly specialized. So I would certainly recommend you buy on, we always recommend to buy on the F term. If you're buying on the C, that's fine. At least you're controlling the customs clearance here. But a D is going to get a little sticky, and DDP, forget about it.
Excellent. Well, thank you guys for attending today. We had a really large crowd, and we're excited to help you guys out, and hopefully we can help you out some more if you guys have any questions. And I really appreciate your guys' expertise, Allison and Patrick, today. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And thanks a lot for everybody for joining us. We appreciate that.